Greetings, shippers! Welcome back, and it's finally here. Kylux, the long-anticipated Kylux. Some feared it would never come, but don't worry, we're doing it. It's time to discuss what is going on in the world of shipping surrounding Kylo Ren and Armitage Hux. This ship has had a fascinating journey since The Force Awakens, and it continues on through The Last Jedi, even though the on-screen interaction is as minimal in this new film as it was in the first. There's a lot to explore here, and like Reylo, it's another ship that suffers from a lot of backlash, and some would argue it actually suffers from more. Like Reylo, it's a ship that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Kylux, like our other updates, was again an early video on my channel, so please check that out if you want to see what the tone was like back then. You can click the card or the link will be down below. So take a trip back to the time of The Force Awakens, but if you don't have time, we'll do a brief recap here, as brief as possible with Kylux. Like I said in Reylo, let's keep it cordial when discussing the ship. We're here to talk about the pros and cons and not bash anybody. But as you guys proved in that comment section, you guys are great at that, so it'll be fine, because you're all superstars. Superstar shippers. Still, if this pairing makes you really uncomfortable and you're not interested in exploring multiple facets of it, I'll catch you next time. Or, I did do updates on Reylo and Stormpilot, so if you would prefer, check one of those out instead, links will be down below. Finally, before we get started, because we are talking about a film that was recently released-ish at the time of this recording, spoilers. I know some people hate any, so be warned, there will be some. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about Kylux.
Kylux occupies an intriguing place within the Star Wars fandom in that it is far more popular than people in the mainstream or even casually in fandom realize it is. This has occurred for a variety of reasons. One, Kylux's growth was a bit slower than the initially more popular Stormpilot, which also received mainstream attention thanks to the enthusiasm with which it was also shipped by Poe Dameron's actor Oscar Isaac, which led to mainstream focus zeroing in on that ship. Alternatively, there was Reylo, which was largely featured in discourse and some articles, and that is currently the mainstream's focus following The Last Jedi. Initially, Kylux appeared to be more of a crack ship, a what if. What if these two characters, who clearly shared an intense yet ill-defined rivalry, were secretly in an intense, potentially BDSM-styled relationship? Or just some other kind of relationship? However, as more and more people came to the ship and began to fashion fan and backstories for the characters, it slowly became a more legitimate ship, with serious shippers who were giving real thought to the relationship between these two characters, be the works comedic in tone or otherwise. During the wait between films, the backstories became more complex as people began to fill in their personalities that were not fully fleshed out in The Force Awakens, leaving shippers with foundations but a lot to fill in, which led to a wealth of fics and art, as well as other creative works, especially fan comics, of which there are an abundance that greatly aid in keeping a large portion of the fandom lighthearted, with some truly creative premises, particularly in regards to Hux, who had the majority of its personality filled in by fans. While there was fluff and postulations of a secret supportive friendship, there were a large contingent of shippers focusing on a more passionate, dark relationship, often featuring Dom subtones. With a variety of takes, though Dom Hux and Sub Ren was a popular one, with fans reading into the way Hux observed Kylo and responded to his more fiery temperament with an icier cool that still had the potential to explode. This, coupled with Kylo's clear displeasure with being critiqued but also clear need to be kept in check, created an intriguing dynamic for shippers. There was also the fact that the two clearly had a shared but not overly elaborated on, at least in the film, history that spans some time, and were used to facing off against each other and were still equals of a sort, and in a way had the potential to balance each other out, albeit in a dark sense, as they are both villains and neither are completely stable, although there are some who would contest Kylo's labeling as a pure villain. All of this fed into the amount of hurt comfort in this fandom, the two consoling each other after various abusive barrages from Snoke, as well as people who wanted to play with the more childish aspect people saw in their rivalry, which was definitely on display in The Last Jedi. People were also quite keen to remove these two from the Star Wars setting altogether, and modern-day AUs abounded. And of course, through it all, there was smut. For what is a dark pairing without some dark smut? So from seemingly unexpected beginnings, a strong ship grew, and steadily became the top ship on certain fan sites, though not all of them, as fandom is varied. Still, it definitely experienced large growth as people waited for the next part of the trilogy. So with those being the rationales behind shipping in the past, where does the ship stand now at the time of this recording following The Last Jedi? And what about the reasons people didn't/don't ship it? Well, as it stands, from its theatrical cut, things are pretty much the same for Hux and Kylo Ren, except Hux took the time to grow out some truly distracting period piece-esque mutton chops between films. In terms of the interactions, they are still on the slim side, although with potentially a couple of more direct exchanges. What is there confirms many of the headcanons set in place within the fandom. The rivalry is still intact, as can be seen by how Hux smirks at Kylo as he passes him in Snoke's throne room. There is still a mix of understanding and concern in how Hux can see when Kylo Ren is losing control and tries to get him to calm calm down, although that may be some self-interest in there. And of course, it is still dark and unhealthy, with physical lashings out and attempted murder abounding. In short, if you were already shipping for any of the aforementioned reasons, this film very much maintained the status quo, and the slight increase in interactions potentially attracted some new shippers. Indeed, some shippers found themselves drawn into Kylux without even meaning to, meaning they entered the fandom in search of other pairings, oftentimes Reylo, and found themselves confronted with an abundance of Kylux, and were intrigued, entering the fandom to find there was actually a wealth of complex and creative stories that swayed them to this ship's side. In fact, Kylux is becoming one of those ships that some become drawn to based off of fan art or fics before or rather than through the source material itself. So with all of that said, why don't people ship them? Well, why people don't ship them is complex and ever evolving, which is why I didn't include it in the recap, because it would simply have taken up too much time. It must be noted that while this ship's cons section is long, that does not necessarily indicate it is a bad ship, but instead merely means that there is a lot of explanation required for the various anti-shipping rationales, as they are not as cut and dry as with other ships. So let's start with the obvious. The two barely interact on screen. In terms of rationale, this is more of a hindrance for either the canon or evidence-based shipper, as many shippers do not even require the characters of their pairing in question to ever have interacted or met on screen or on panel. Indeed, for many the appeal of Kylux is how little backstory and interaction there is, as it provides essentially a blank canvas for any and all ideas. Instead of being bound by canon, one can almost entirely create their own. Of course, this wide reign and freedom can also drive people away, as they feel it makes the ship unrealistic or too broad to get behind. The kind of pairing people define by using shipping goggles in a negative fashion, to imply that the fan is simply going in looking to ship any and everything. Although some note there is just as much interaction, or potentially more, between these two than a rival ship such as Stormpilot, although their interaction is significantly more positive than Kylux, which leads into another charge leveled against this ship, namely that it is racist. There is a theory within fandom that people are more likely to ship two Caucasian male protagonists together regardless of circumstances or chemistry rather than ship any other pairing. Some fans feel this accounts for Kylux's popularity, as they really see no chemistry or rationale to ship these two, outside of this trope. However, some take it a step further and feel that to ship Kylux over Stormpilot is a sign of prejudice. This critique is also leveled against Reylo as well, though often by different shippers. The rationale being that shippers would rather ship this negative, unhealthy pairing with no proof rather than a positive, loving pairing like Stormpilot, because the characters within Stormpilot are people of color. Now, there is a lot to examine here, and for the time we'll have to leave this trope behind, because otherwise this video would be a lot longer than it's already going to be. So let's just examine it in terms of this pairing within this fandom. Firstly, all of this implies a deliberate choice in shipping that does not match the majority of shippers' experiences, as they're often drawn to pairings through a knee-jerk reaction and moments that appeal to them rather than seeking out people to ship based on orientation or race, though that does of course happen. Although the two Caucasian males pairing owes many factors to its popularity, such as the prevalence of those characters and a lack of focus on multi-ethnic queer pairings rather than outright bias, although some would argue that the bias is subconscious. However, for some, even if Poe and Finn were Caucasian, they argue they still would not ship them, simply because part of the appeal of Kylux is the foyer element, meaning they are drawn to the conflict of the pairing over the relatively seemingly conflict-free Stormpilot. In short, some feel Kylux has more to work with, similarly to how many feel Reylo has more to offer narratively than Faye. Some simply see more appeal in conflict and the ways that can drive a narrative over a pairing where it feels like the conflict must be manufactured, either in character or circumstance. For example, while Stucky is a pairing between friends, the circumstance provides the conflict. In fact, in The Last Jedi, Poe was denied the chance to go to Canto Bight as he did in the original draft with Finn due to what the director viewed as a lack of conflict between the characters to make the plot compelling, although there are some theories he didn't get to go on that trip for alternate reasons. The point being, while the shipping any white male trope may be in play for some shippers, there are, as always, many other factors. However, claims of prejudice do not end there for Kylux. Outside of the race angle, some are simply anti-shipping within the First Order. The reason, they are uncomfortable with what they feel is the romanticization of Nazi imagery. The First Order is definitely drawing upon the Third Reich for a lot of its aesthetics, and because of this, many fans have dubbed them Space Nazis. While it may be meant to simply be a simplified label to note the simplicity of the First Order characterization, others take it much more literally, and as such view Hux and Kylo as Nazis, an identification not aided by the fact fact that Hux is often referred to as Ginger Space Nazi within the fandom, or that some call the pairing Nazi space boyfriends rather than evil space boyfriends. This makes many shippers uncomfortable, as especially in the Western, particularly the Amerocentric sociopolitical discourse at the time of this recording, no one wants to be spreading pro-Nazi messages, as the landscape is particularly volatile. So even if some are drawn to this pairing, this element may make them stay away. However, it must be noted that the majority of shippers are not attempting to glorify Nazism, and the use of the term is more hyperbolic and in some cases playful. While some may scoff that the term could ever be used in less than a serious manner, it often comes down to a fundamentally different approach to certain fans' interpretation of Star Wars, that being the literal attempt to draw parallels to our current world at the time of this recording versus the desire to remove the story from our mundane context and elevate it to the fantastic and dwell in its more metaphorical elements that allow for a variety of interpretations and a more mythological form of representation and storytelling. In short, while most fans do note the Nazi symbolism, not all of them equate them with literal real-world Nazis. For some, it is more a question of the grander symbolism of good versus evil, order versus chaos, and they wish to explore the tale of two individuals on the side of evil, but not necessarily Nazis. However, some feel that regardless of the intention, the result is the same, because the imagery is so blatant that it can be taken as romanticization no matter what. However, other shippers feel that really must be interpreted within the story itself, and that one can tell what the intent of the story is if they give it a chance. Some shippers enjoy exploring darker themes and would argue that it's not necessarily supposed to be pleasant, but meant to tell an intriguing story. This debate of too progressive or politically correct has dogged this new trilogy, particularly The Last Jedi, and the ships can find themselves the unwitting playground for such discussions. Some love the additions of diversity and a focus on females that the film brought to the foreground, and the idea that anybody can be a hero, or a villain, for despite claims that the Resistance was more diverse than the First Order also had its own share of diversity. However, while some are ambivalent, others feel that this focus on current issues and the way it was placed front and center take away from the fantastic elements of Star Wars, moving it away from grand space opera to soapbox. Similar to Earth being the center of the universe in most sci-fi, the focus on us rendering it ultimately less creative or interesting for some viewers, while others feel it is essential for works to speak to current issues to be relevant and have significant impact. In short, it often becomes a question of escapism versus representation, and the fact that many feel a balance was not struck. Kylux is also plagued by the idea that it is often critiqued by those within fandom as well as outside it, which means it can face critiques by those who feel that one's ships directly reflect their personal beliefs, politics, and morality. This can occur from other fans, but often also occurs from outside of the shipping community as well. However, this belief often ignores creative license, the multiplicities of appeals of various ships, the presence of multi-shipping, multiple fandoms, and numerous other factors that render both fandom and the individuals within it far too complex to be judged by one ship. However, the complaints against Kylux are not done. Some are against the fact that it is not a healthy relationship, that those writing them as a BDSM couple are conflating it with abusive elements because of how the ship is presented canonically, to which some feel that the BDSM fics vary, some are good, some are bad, and that fiction can be a place to explore unhealthy relationships, and that they are villains similar to Harley and Joker, so some wonder why people expect a healthy relationship from the two, although some do try and create healthy story arcs for them. Although all of that aside, some still feel that there is a fetishization of BDSM culture without a true understanding of what it means. So why is Kylux plagued with so many cons? Is it simply a super problematic ship, or is there something else at play here? Well, perhaps, but also at the time of this recording, this fandom is still popular and indeed reinvigorated, and people are now awaiting the next installment. In short, it is at its zenith. And when a fandom is at its peak, it usually also peaks in a variety of forms of toxicity. And in a fandom with so many ships, that means ship wars. While there are multiple shippers, there are also many single shippers, and thanks to the passion with which everyone ships their ships, there can be a desire to see one ship be the one true ship, be it canonically or within fanon. The Star Wars fandom, like many others, has always tended towards infighting, be it about canon, terminology, or technical specs, meaning within the shipping fandom it is just as passionate. Thanks to the nature of the top ships in question, there are often many insults thrown back and forth. Some of these take place under the guise of social justice, but rather than true social justice, some of these attacks are used to validate one's own ship by bringing down others, as there is frustration that Kylux is so popular, particularly as many feel their ships are better, healthier, more interesting, or more inclusive. Now, that is not to say there aren't any interesting discussions to be had vis-a-vis the popularity of these ships. Unfortunately, as the ships are currently so popular, tempers often run high, and such such discourse can often deteriorate, particularly as certain ships are looking far more likely than others. However, while most Kylux shippers recognize that their ship will never become canon, it doesn't mean that they are all perfect innocent saints, and they can give just as good as they get. And there are, unfortunately, it must be acknowledged, some bigots amongst them. However, there are bigots of some variety in every fandom, and most likely in every pairing, unfortunately. The Star Wars fandom is currently highly politicized, which some fans find enjoyable and others find annoying, as these discussions tire some who wish to forget in their hobbies and entertainment, while others are invigorated by these discussions and deem them necessary in all aspects of life, including fandom. Though some fear these discussions do take on an Amerocentric worldview that can exclude other fans if not balanced with the acknowledgement that fandom occurs on a global scale, especially with a fandom as large as Star Wars. For some lucky shippers, they have avoided all of this and have slipped right into this ship and others and the fandom in general with ease, and so all of this drama may come as a surprise. For other shippers, this ship flows narratively, and the pairing of Kylux makes sense to them, as Star Wars has always been about the pull of light and dark, and the journeys characters must make in their paths. So to take these two characters of darkness and flesh them out, since so much time was dedicated to the journey towards the light of other characters, made sense to many. And some simply found the characters appealing, be it physically, or narratively, or a combination of the two, and are unashamed of how surface the appeal may have been for them. And of course the same can be said for the opposite, just being repelled by the characters on some surface level. As always, there are many different ways to ship. Some are more in it for fun, others do combine their fandom with their politics, and some enjoy a combination of both. The trick is to respect how each fan enjoys fandom so long as it is not abusive or harmful to others. Ship and let's ship, and no way is better than the other, and for many fans, it really varies from fandom to fandom. For Kylux, if one wishes to avoid most of the discourse, as always, Tumblr is one to avoid, although the ship does not seem to be at its most popular there, instead being more popular in fic form on sites such as Archive of Our Own and Wattpad. There are many reasons to ship Kylux and many reasons not to ship it. Basically, each person will find themselves drawn to it or repelled based on their own tastes, experience, and subject positions, and it is dangerous to assume maliciousness in the preferences of others. So where will Kylux go canonically? It is likely to remain the same or deteriorate should Ben start down a redemption arc. However, in fandom, it is still going strong as many new fans discover it. However, Kylux is no better or worse than any Star Wars ship. They all have their pros and cons, and fandom is different than canon. And what would be great for one group should a certain ship become canon should not be held against another ship, particularly as it is unlikely one or both will ever happen. Again, we can all ship together and there is room for discussion and airing of dissenting opinions, but there is also always time for respect.
Are you guys Kylux shippers? Have you been caught up in any of the wars or negativity, or has the fandom been a really pleasant, relatively toxicity-free experience for you? I have to say, Kylux holds a special place in my heart because it's the video that got me on a fan lore page. Yes, I am on the Kylux fan lore page down in the meta section with my first video on Kylux. Good times. So that brings us to the end of our Star Wars updates, but if you've been hanging out in the community section of my channel, you know we're not done yet. There's more to come. The ships are still strong with this one. Stronger than my jokes, that's for sure. So before I leave you, one last question that we haven't really addressed yet. How did you guys feel about The Last Jedi in general, all shipping aside? Let me know down below. Thanks so much for spending some time shipping with me today, and let's get to that outro.
This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all my patrons, and please feel free to follow me on social media to keep up to date with what's coming up next. Thanks again, and as always, stay tuned, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.